Greetings, my friends. It is so good to be with you. For this weekend's texts, we look at some very difficult exchanges. These are difficult exchanges between God in the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. And they are difficult exchanges between Jesus and his family, his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees around him. All of these people, in some way, are closing in on Jesus, whether they want to or not, or whether they realize it or not. And even though it may seem that God the Father or the Creator in the Genesis passage is closing in on Adam and Eve, you can also say that the reality of sin has confronted God in the garden, and God has something to say about it. When Jesus is confronted by the scribes for healing people with demonic possessions and mental illnesses and all of these things, notice what they say, the scribes and the Pharisees and those who do not like him. They say that he must be doing this with a power that is not from God, that is from the opposite. Beelzebul, they say. He's doing this with demonic powers. But Jesus says, how can I cast out a demon with the powers of a demon? Demons want to be feeding off of us. So the last thing they want to do is to leave us. This is perhaps a scary concept, but really it is quite real. Anyone who is struggling with temptation or addiction or anything that is not of God, they know that they need help from God. They need Jesus to clear out that temptation, to clear out that possession, or you might say that love of our personal possessions, our earthly possessions. I just think it's interesting how God demonstrates that even God has trepidation about us and our sin. God is not maybe necessarily worried about it, but there's something somehow where God's love hits a wall. And God has to spell out, as Jesus does, that our love has definition. It has boundaries. Love is a verb more than a noun most times. Love requires something of us. Even though we are loved not because of what we have done, but because of who we are and whose we are, we know that that love is something that is through us. It is given to us to help share with others. And so Jesus gets really real about why love needs to be protected. In the Genesis passage, our love needs to be protected because our love is tied to our relationship with God. And whether or not we are listening and whether or not we are truly doing love, whether we are truly acting in accordance with love, whether we are listening to God's commandments and God's instructions for us to live good lives. In the Garden of Eden, it was simple. There was just one fruit that we couldn't eat from, that fruit of temptation, that fruit that somehow made us think that we didn't need God. And of course, the serpent is the one who made the case to Eve, who made the case to Adam. And then we see that Adam just tries to point the finger right over to Eve and then serpent instead of looking at his own choice. Love is a choice. Love is a series of choices. It is a verb. And Jesus tries to make that crystal clear in the passage for today. Love can be caught in the midst of a struggle between one temptation and another, between one group of people that we like and one group that does not like us. love struggles because we are all made in God's image. And there's not just bad people and not just good people. There is good and bad. There is temptation dwelling in all of us. We get in trouble because we dismiss people. We get in trouble by labeling people instead of seeing the temptation that may be coming from them or to them and addressing it for what it is. Jesus talks about temptation and sin as if it is an active entanglement. What do I mean by that? Well, Jesus has this parable about the strong man in the house, and the strong man is Jesus, but it is also the Jesus within us. It is our best selves. It is our faithful selves. And so when we are the strong man in our house, if our house is our faith or our family or our lives, if we become entangled and bound up by temptation, by sin, by addiction, by toxicity, it could be the toxicity of someone that we know that has infiltrated what we know to be right and wrong. It could be a substance or a practice that it becomes an addiction. It could be any number of sins. Every now and then I have a conversation with someone who asks me point blank, will this entanglement cause me a faith problem? And I always try to volley back and say, how is this affecting your life? Is this entangling your ability to love another person? Is this entangling your ability to exercise your faith and be a Christian and live out your life? Because if it is, that is a problem. Jesus says to his family, who really wants him to be a little bit nicer and a little bit less controversial, he says to them, in order to truly be my family, you must follow me and follow the gospel. Listen to the Lord and do what love requires, which is not always easy. It can be a struggle. And the Pharisees who come after him, he compares them, or at least what they're trying to do, with temptation personified, trying to bind Jesus up. Sometimes our family's expectations are more than we can handle, and they're more than we should. We know when that happens. Sometimes our enemy's expectations can seem crushing, and we have to look to Jesus to help us get out of this entanglement, to live unfettered, and to love and choose to love. The last image I want to share with you is that of the commentator that I was reading about this particular gospel text. And he was saying, the good news isn't always just fluffy good news that's all good. The good news can also be interpreted as good news from the battlefield, or if you're not really looking for that militaristic comparison, it's good news from the struggle. I've been struggling this for some time, you might say, and now I have a bright spot. The good news from the struggle between those things that try to bind us and the God who is waiting always to help unentangle us and to make love a clear choice. That is where we reside often, is it not? Friends, my prayer to you for this weekend and always is that you hear the clarity in Jesus' voice. My mother and my brother and my sister and my father and my family are those who follow Jesus too. Because only when we see the Jesus in one another and we allow ourselves to get untangled from our temptations and from sin and from toxicity, only then will we truly understand the power of the love that we were given and the salvation that is a gift from God today and always. Amen.